Hello and welcome to another of PAVE's weekly panel discussion series. This week we have a really important and interesting topic that is also a very timely one because you may have noticed that this week PAVE signed on to an existing standard for driver assistance systems, a standard for language, for nomenclature about driver assistance systems that was put together by our guests today. And so who better to discuss the importance of nomenclature to ADAS and why this really matters, why this is so much more than sort of a pedantic dictionary exercise. So let's start off with our guests. First up, we have Kelly Funkhouser from Consumer Reports. Kelly, welcome, and would you just say a few words to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kelly Funkhouser, and I am the head of Connected and Automated Vehicle Testing at Consumer Reports. And this has been a passion project of mine for about 7 years. So I'm really glad that it's come to the head and we have so much support, and it's really exciting to have PAVE join on as well.
Thanks, Kelly. And from AAA, we have Greg Brannon. Greg, welcome.
There, thank you. Greg Brannon, I'm the Director of Automotive Engineering and Industry Relations for AAA. I've got responsibility for vehicle testing and research, as well as have been with Kelly and the other Kelly here, been working for several years on this initiative to support ongoing education and research around advanced driver assistance systems. And we really are happy to be part of the discussion today.
Thank you. And from the National Safety Council and also PAVE's co-chair, Kelly Nantel. Welcome back, Kelly.
Thanks, Ed. It's great to be back. It's Kelly Nantel. I'm the Vice President of the Roadway Practice for the National Safety Council. And as you said, Ed, one of the co-chairs of PAVE. Really excited to have PAVE sign on to the nomenclature document and to agree to use this unified set of definitions as we continue to want to clarify all the confusion that exists out there around ADAS technology as well as AVs. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. It's great to be back, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Kelly Funkhouser, you mentioned that you've been working on this for 7 years. That is a lot longer than I think most people have been thinking and working on it. So can you just explain a little bit where this sort of first came from? What was the need for this, or what got your attention on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So back 7 years ago, I was in grad school and starting to study this new field of driver assistance and self-driving vehicles at that time, which 7 years doesn't seem that long ago for how far we've come in the technology, but the programs weren't really out there. And I quickly realized that even in industry, it was hard to talk about these technologies because everyone was using a different term. And even if we were using the same terms, we meant two different things. And so I quickly learned that there was a need to standardize the terminology, and it was a passion project. The reason I say passion project of mine, because it was very fascinating to realize how all of the different technologies were developing simultaneously to tackle the same problem. And we see this in other technologies as well, but this one, everything was moving so quickly, and we don't have the luxury of kind of waiting for all of the industry to catch up and get on board together and have this technological convergence. When it's something so important and safety related in the vehicles, then it's really important that we all kind of get on the same page as early as possible so that as we're developing the technologies, we can share the resources and keep in mind what's important and have the same conversations to really advance the safety of the technology.
Yeah. And Greg, I know AAA has done a lot of research into sort of how people relate to and use ADAS. And I think some of the studies that you've done have really found that what Kelly's saying is true. There's a lot of confusion about these terms out there.
That's exactly right, and there's no surprise that confusion exists. When we started this a few years ago, trying to make some sense of what was happening in the space, we started it as a research project to understand, just how expansive the problem was, and what we found was pretty scary. There were, in some cases, over 20 different names for functions that have been out there for years, like adaptive cruise control, for instance. And when you have 20 different names for something, it's very easy for consumers to become confused about what that technology means and what to do with it, and how to safely use it. And so we've done some follow-up work on that as well, and that confusion really does exist, and particularly whenever we're talking about higher levels of automation, like we might see in level 2 systems that some might know as autopilot, pilot assist, ProPilot. When you're using those kind of names, about 30% of Americans believe that those systems have the ability to drive the car by itself, and that's a dangerous and incorrect assumption.
Yeah, absolutely. Kelly Nantel, can you maybe talk a little bit about the safety aspect of this? Greg sort of hinted at it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, just to build on what Greg said, 20 different names for adaptive cruise control. You've got 40 different names across makes and models for automatic emergency braking. People are confused. They don't know what technology they have. They don't know how it works. They don't know how to interact with it. Several years ago, we did a poll with the University of Iowa, and we found that 44% of the people that we polled, they were startled or surprised by something that their vehicle did. That's just unacceptable when these technologies are designed to keep you safer, and yet you're confused or startled by them. What happens? People shut them off. They don't use them, or they over-rely on them, as Greg mentioned in some cases. But the net gain is not the safety benefit that we should see with those technologies. And so we've got to do a much better job of helping people understand what the technology is for, how it works, when it doesn't work, and have some consistency around how we describe it and what they're called. And all of those things are really going to help consumers embrace the technology. And I think Kelly and Greg are in agreement with me, is that these ADAS technologies are really building blocks towards confidence in higher levels of automation. We've got to get it right now so that we can reap the benefits of AVs down the road.
Yeah. We recently had a panel discussion with some human automation interaction experts from academia, from our academic advisory council, and they were talking about how the human is really a fundamental part of these systems, right? And so Kelly Funkhouser, how the human perceives a system is really fundamental to whether it can work properly, right?
Sorry, mute button's hard to find. Yes, exactly that. Not only how people perceive them, but understanding kind of what the goal of a system is and what it's trying to do is the most important. So even if two automakers or manufacturers use different sensors or different programming to achieve the same goal, say automatic emergency braking or blind spot warning, if there's different underlying engineering or hardware or software, but it's meant to do the same thing, warn the driver of an object or another vehicle in the blind spot, or stop the car if there's an imminent collision. The driver just needs to understand the intent of the car and what it's trying to do, what the system is trying to do, to be able to have faith in it, trust it, and be able to rely on it and use it correctly. Less important about what sensors and calibration metrics and software is underlying it. And so this kind of leads us to the reason that we have so many different names, 20, 40 different names for things, is because some of these underlying hardware and software mechanisms may be different in different vehicles. But the reason that we're pushing for this uniform naming is because drivers and consumers understand it at kind of a task and goal-based level, not so much what's underlying mechanisms are making it do the thing. They just try to understand, they want to know what the thing is that it's doing. And so if we have something like automatic emergency braking, if the cars are all trying to automatically brake for an imminent collision, then that's why we are pushing for this standard cohesive language.
So what you're standardizing is function rather than necessarily sort of what the car is doing with this system versus how it's actually doing that.
In a broad sense, yes, exactly that. So what the goal of the system is. So automatic emergency braking or blind spot warning, those are features or systems that have kind of an understandable and easy to digest chunk of meaning for drivers. And so if one uses a radar and one uses a camera, if they're both doing the same function overall, from a driver's perspective, from us simple mind, non-mechanical engineers, if we can try to understand it as doing the same thing and having the same intention, then in order to have a conversation about that feature, we should probably call it the same thing.
So it's an interesting to notice that's a different approach than sort of maybe the SAE automation level systems, which seem to be much more sort of oriented around how you sort of think of these as engineering tasks. I assume this is just because this is real stuff on the road now that real consumers are going to use, and so they need to have it presented to them as on that kind of relatable consumer-facing level, right?
Yeah, I think that's right, Ed. I think the SAE levels of automation are great for those who work in the field and understand the engineering and, and are really immersed in it. But for the average driver, the levels of automation are confusing and doesn't provide any clarity. And so having definitions and using language that is simple and easy to understand is imperative. And, I know you know this, but the National Safety Council launched a website called My Car Does What several years ago. It was the first attempt to sort of demystify ADAS technology for the average consumer. And it's really a one-stop shop where you can go in and learn about the various types of ADAS technology, how they work, how they're designed to work, what they will or won't do in many cases. But it's really the first step in helping consumers understand the technology so that they'll use it in the manner in which it was designed to be used.
Yeah. Greg, did you have...
No, I think Kelly summed it up well. The bottom line is that we can't begin to understand a particular system if we don't even know what to call it. And that's really fundamentally, that's what we're trying to solve. If, before we get into performance standards or even care about how the systems work from a sensor base, if we can't decide we're talking about the same thing, then, we can't even begin that conversation. So we're very happy to have PAVE on board now, along with SAE and the other organizations that have signed on to adopt this nomenclature.
Yeah. So there's a great question from our friends at Strategy Analytics, which I think is probably on a lot of people's minds, which is what is the so what of this effort? Which is, I think it's a good thing to discuss here. So what does this standard do really? And maybe what does it also not do?
I'll take the first crack at that and maybe get some help here. But the so what is really back to my previous point. If we can't decide what these things are called, how can we possibly then begin to even think about performance standards around their use and what it means? And so what it means right now is that there's terms that we can begin to socialize and bring into the consumer's vernacular that describe these systems in a consistent way. So when they're looking, let's say, at a new vehicle and they want to find one that has adaptive cruise control, they don't have to dig through the literature to see that same system then is available on another car they're looking at. And so that's from the consumer standpoint, that they should be able to assume that the systems are going to that there's some semblance of similarity between the systems on any vehicles they're looking at. What it doesn't mean is that we're saying, and the other organizations that have joined us are saying exactly how those systems systems will work. I think Kelly said it earlier, you know, we're not saying that you have to use radar to perform adaptive cruise control. We're just saying that adaptive cruise control basically controls the distance between you and another vehicle in front of you. You can do that however you like. And by the way, we're also not telling manufacturers that they have to use these names. They are free to market the systems with their own individual names and try to, you know, create any differentiation they want. But whenever they're marketing that system, they can call it Distronic Plus or whatever they'd like. But right behind that, they should say adaptive cruise control, so the consumer will know vehicle to vehicle what they're looking at.
Yeah, it's Kelly Funkhouser. When we talked about this earlier, when PAVE was sort of, you know, moving towards this decision to sign on, you had a really fantastic analogy for what Greg just described. Do you want to share it?
Sure, I'll take a stab at what's in your head. I think you're talking about kind of like the recipe or prescription drug. So,
yeah.
So you can have, you know, a Distronic Plus package or a recipe to make Kelly Funkhouser's grandma's brownies. And the ingredients that go in that, my brownie recipe versus your brownie recipe might be slightly different, but eggs are eggs, sugar is sugar. The amount of this and the amount of that might vary slightly. So one system might be called Distronic Plus, one might be called Autopilot, one may rely more on cameras, one may use radar and sonar, but the function, what the sum product ends up being is adaptive cruise control or automatic emergency braking. So there are different components that can go into it, but it all is making the same thing. And so that's kind of how I use the analogy to describe it, is you can call it what you want as long as people understand exactly those different components that go in it and what it makes in the end.
Yeah, and I think that's such a important and easy to like overlook thing, because right, where a brownie begins and ends might be something up for debate. The internet has argued about whether a hot dog is a sandwich or not for decades, right? But if you know what the ingredients in it are, then you understand what you're actually putting in your body, and I think there's kind of a similar principle here, right?
Right, and you may even have, you know, my grandma's secret ingredient, right? So someone may have this stop and go part of their ACC where it had, you know, it doesn't time out, it indefinitely will continue stop and go in a flow of traffic, or it will, you know, all these different caveats and, you know, these nuances can still be part of the same recipe. So everyone may do it slightly different, but we're still making brownies.
Yeah. So there will still be at least, you know, these, the companies will be free to market these systems or combinations of these systems or however they want, but the standard, you know, the systems that make them up will have these standardized terminologies. So Kelly, Nantella, it seems like we'll still have to some extent a bit of this problem of just the sheer volume of names when you add up all the brand names that are out there from all the automakers. So there'll be some of that. So and I know you mentioned My Car Does What. What are some of the other things we can do to sort of complement this standard, you know, in terms of this education piece?
Well, I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that this is an iterative process. This is the first step, and it's a big first step, and we're really proud of it, you know, and the more organizations that come forward and embrace it, the stronger this step becomes, and it also gives us momentum to move to the next steps, you know. So we've taken the first crack at it, and really Kelly and Greg from AAA, you know, they were instrumental. I think the National Safety Council, we're wonderful partners and came in and added our perspective, but it really was Consumer Reports and AAA who were down in the weeds of it very early on. I think we need to get more organizations to embrace this, and then we need to build off of this first iteration of the definitions. You know, and as we start to create a common narrative around the technologies, the terms and the definitions, then you can start to dive into things like how they perform. Is the performance consistent across? We can start to get into how they're rated. There's, you know, where the safety ratings come in and those kinds of things. So I think there's a lot more work to be done, but this was a really monumental first step.
Yeah, and Greg and Kelly, do you have anything to add on sort of how you see things sort of playing out from here? What sort of the future iterations we can maybe look at to build on this progress?
I think Kelly Nantel said it right. It is an iterative process here, right? And this is just the first step in getting that momentum. However, I think we're already seeing some good traction. We've made some good progress with SAE, and those of you that work with SAE know it is a painful process to get a standard created and get something approved. However, I can assure you, whenever it comes out of the back, you will have the best thinking of really everyone in the industry behind it. So getting SAE on board is tremendous, because that's where people go to look for the thread pitch on a bolt whenever they're making it, and everything else that you use to build a car. And so if we start with that standardization and we see that proliferation start there, I think we've got some really good first steps. And then, beyond that, as we start to work with media and incorporate it into the language that media is using to describe these systems is fantastic. But even just the power of our own organizations talking with our members and media using these terms, it starts to get that ball rolling. And once that ball's rolling, it's going to be hard to stop. I feel like it's well down the hill at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Greg, is that the power in this is how widespread the use of the definitions and the descriptions are. And our organizations and SAE have all committed, and now PAVE have all committed to talk, to use these definitions to drive our narrative. That's really the strength of this. And to have Secretary Chow and the US DOT also acknowledge the need for it and to embrace it, I think is another huge step forward. So like I said, the more organizations who come forward and say that we're going to adopt these definitions as well, the better the narrative becomes, the easier the messaging is, the clearer the understanding of the consumer is, and that's where we're going to make the most progress.
Yeah. And Kelly Funkhouser, I mean, again, you've been working on this for 7 years. I have to imagine that, it wasn't all just for this one thing, right? You have things that you'd like to see sort of come out of this or build on this. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a continually iterative process. This technology isn't slowing down anytime soon, but like Greg said, this really was a big first step. We're not naive to knowing how big of a problem this was, and there were many groups and efforts trying to tackle this problem. And really, this page sitting in front of me, it's not necessarily how I would have written it, but the most important thing is that it was a first step. So we have, very importantly, SAE and all the engineers on board, as well as talks with the US DOT. We are really trying to get everyone's voice and came up with this document that is going to improve over time. But starting somewhere was the most fundamental step in this process. Starting somewhere with this uniform language that we can then iterate and expand on as features improve or change, or we get new features in the future. But really, and again, going back to AAA was kind of the first one to put out some version of this glossary, and that's what it took. It took someone brave enough to go out and just say, this is what we're going to start calling these things. And then we made modifications from there, and luckily have this amazing group of co-authors on this document to move forward with.
So we have a number of questions from the audience sort of about regulation or enforcement, or sort of even establishing this as a standard through one of the various standard bodies. Is that something that you think is either necessary or desirable here, or do you think this can accomplish sort of what you set out to accomplish, sort of as a voluntary standard that organizations sort of sign on to?
It's funny right now. It's probably not the time to go seek for federal regulation on pretty much any topic, and it's just not the way that things are being done now. And instead, what you're seeing is exactly what we've tried to do here: a coalition of the willing. And once you get the industry moving forward on something, then the regulation becomes unnecessary. And in some ways, we're able to move quicker because we're not waiting on the government to work through the regulatory process. So it's not perfect. Would we love a regulation that completely adopts this and pushes it all out and makes it required next week? Sure, it's not going to happen. So, so instead, I think we have this coalition to continue to move things forward.
And I think Greg said that well. Hopefully regulation isn't necessary. And my hope is that industry and other organizations will realize the profound benefits of using this common nomenclature. As was mentioned earlier, we have a lot of people going out and seeking out this equipment on their next vehicle, particularly the safety systems. And if automakers want to be able to sell the cars with these safety systems, then the communication needs to run all the way through from the automaker all the way to the intended buyer. And if we're not speaking the same language and using the same descriptions, then that purchase may not happen. And we've heard this several times through surveys. We recently did a secret shopper project where it was quite alarming, the amount of inconsistencies in the nomenclature and descriptions that were used on something as simple as automatic emergency braking. And we found that if those had been actual consumers and purchasers, then they may have left the dealer's lot with a vehicle without that safety equipment on it. And that is what worries us and motivates me personally to really stand behind this effort and hopefully persuade everyone to get on board.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I just want to say, from PAVE's perspective, like this is also so important for us, because you literally, as you alluded to, you can't really educate unless you know what you're teaching, right? Unless there's a commonly accepted way to talk about that, but then also to actually divide up what we know about various kinds of driver automation. And so I really want to thank all of you for obviously for being here today, helping take the time to help us all understand what this is and why it matters, but really for just doing it. I mean, the years that have gone into this, it really it's something that makes what PAVE does possible. And we really look forward to seeing more of this kind of work, both from yourself and hopefully from all the stakeholders in this space. So thank you all so much. Kelly Funkhouser from Consumer Reports, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Ed.
Kelly Nantel, National Safety Council, thank you, Kelly. And Greg Brannon from AAA.
Thank you very much.
And thank you also to our audience for making the time to be here today. We do have a Medium post up about sort of our decision to sign on to this standard, and there's a little bit more background on sort of our perspective on that there. And you can also go, actually, I should probably get, where's the best place for people to go to actually read this standard so they can actually see what we're talking about here?
I can tell you the standard, the document is on all of our websites, so it's easy to find. If you do a search for Clearing the Confusion, you'll find multiple links to the document, and you can feel free to reach out to any of us or any of our organizations if you're interested in being a partner in it. We'd be happy to have everyone on board, so don't hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely. You can also find it at pavecampaign.org/news. It's right at the top of our feed there. So again, thank you all to all of our guests, and thank you so much to our audience for taking the time to learn a little bit more about this really important process, which I completely agree with all of our guests. We're only just beginning, and there's a lot more to do. So thank you, and we'll see you again next week on another of PAVE's weekly panel discussions.